excited to start our final hour of our Let's Talk Diversity by introducing Amanda Huynh, who is a Canadian product and food designer working at the intersections of community building, social innovation, and sustainable design. Amanda earned her industrial design degree from Emily Carr University of Art and Design and worked as a professional designer for several years before realizing she could combine her love of design and food. And this led her to pursue a master's degree in food design from the Scuola Politecnica di Design in Milan, Italy. Amanda is a leader on the IDSA Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council, and she's joining us today from Pratt, where she is an assistant professor in industrial design. Welcome to Let's Talk Diversity, Amanda.
Thank you, Natalie.
And we will open our session. I'll invite Brian to participate as well.
Great, thank you. So welcome to Indigenizing Industrial Design. This session will be a discussion around how Indigenous knowledge, placemaking, and placekeeping play an important role in the future of fostering a diverse, equitable, and inclusive industrial design ecosystem. As Natalie mentioned, my name is Amanda Huynh. I was born and raised in Treaty 7 territory, the traditional ancestral Blackfoot Confederacy territory, which we call Southern Alberta in Canada. I am a professor of industrial design here at Pratt Institute in Lenape-Hoking, and I'm deeply, deeply grateful to be on this land. I'm so proud to introduce Brian. Brian Skeet is an Indigenous Diné Navajo designer born in Tuba City, Arizona, and raised on the rim of the Grand Canyon. Skeet is a multidisciplinary designer that strives to cultivate Indigenous initiatives through design, research, technology, and innovation. Strategically, Skeet's work focuses on energizing future Indigenous creatives to illuminate systemic issues and cultivate culturally centered solutions with Indigenous communities. Skeet is also the co-creator and designer for Indigidesign Collab, owner of Brian Skeet Design LLC, and together, the both of us are on the leadership team for the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Council of IDSA. He is the IDSA Phoenix Professional Chapter DEI Liaison. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Brian.
All right, yeah, thank you, Amanda. Yat Brian Skeet Inishne, Sediskin Kia Ani Baschi, Dashtaja Tabai Dashiche, Ishin E Dashinella. Hello, my name is Brian Skeet, and I am Diné or Navajo. I currently live in Phoenix, Arizona. Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes. And I acknowledge that my home within the Phoenix metropolitan area is situated on the homelands of many Indigenous, including the Acoma Altum and Pipash. I recognize the original inhabitants of this land and recognize they still reside through the Phoenix metropolitan area. And I also recognize their generosity and wisdom that they share with me and my family and tribal leaders. We also recognize the original architects of bringing life to the desert, the Huhugam, by designing the canal systems for irrigation and survival. The Salt River Project Company still uses these canals today, and I recognize and acknowledge the Indigenous people of this land. Thank you. All right, so again, my name is Brian Skeet, and I graduated from ASU Design School in Industrial Design. And currently I have been working with other Indigenous designers who have mainly been in fields of graphic design, architecture, and also other Indigenous industrial designers as well.
So Brian, I think the easiest way to begin is really asking you what led you to industrial design and seeing that design is inherent in Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and how that all kind of came together for you.
Yeah, kind of growing up at the Grand Canyon National Park, I thought I knew my identity as far as being an Indigenous person of the land, but I think as I've kind of grown older and through my path of discovering myself, I think naturally I've found myself in the field of design only because there are so many aspects about design that relate to our traditional knowledge and our culture. I kind of bounced around with a lot of different careers, from being a firefighter to being, you know, kind of just floating around in different career paths. And then once I found design, I had no idea what it was called. But I knew the description and everything I was doing was design. So I found a school in Phoenix that did graphic design. And that became a natural, kind of a natural career path for me. Doing logos, creating t-shirts, and that's all stuff I've been doing while I was in school just to make money on the side. And when I got to that school, they named it graphic design. I was like, oh, this is what I've been doing the whole time. And then I eventually evolved my my learning and understanding of design through exploring other avenues of design. So I kind of fell into industrial design, which I was kind of at a fork in the road with my career path at the time, really unhappy. And then my then fiance had told me to explore like industrial design. She said there was 3D printing, there was sketching, there was a lot of making. The process of making was involved a lot with industrial design. So I got into the program at ASU, and then it was just kind of a natural thing for me. It just ended up being a natural part of my process in creating things. And while I was at school at ASU, there's an aspect that I fell into, or kind of discovered, that there weren't a lot of people like me. I mean, I got into industrial design in my late 20s, but being in a class full of kids between 19 and 25, I mean, all of them were white. And I think coming into that place, even being in kind of an older person in class, still having kids ask me, you know, some really ignorant questions about where I was from, who I was, and if Native Americans still even existed. So that kind of led me down another path, as well as trying to find a way to still do design, but also be in the space of other designers, especially in a space where, you know, it's been dominated by white males. And even, you know, yeah, I think kind of going into that space, I really wanted to find out if my career path was going to be the right direction. And lo and behold, I found a kind of a different path that kind of encompassed graphic design, but it was designing a magazine for students who are coming to ASU. And the magazine really fostered resources that help students kind of learn about places on campus. ASU is one of the largest campuses in the country. And learning more about those resources, I was really happy to see that ASU was taking the time to allow Indigenous people to, Indigenous faculty at ASU and students to be kind of the champions of making spaces for other Indigenous students. And that's kind of where I got linked into indigenizing space, and how I realized like that was kind of an important part of you know, what it means to indigenize and the importance of it. So learning more about those resources, and then also hearing other stories from other students experiencing the same thing that I was experiencing, being invisible, not being acknowledged, and just kind of glossed over. So yeah. I knew that we were, I knew we all had a kind of a commonality in our stories. So it kind of gave me that push to kind of keep pushing forward in making the magazine, and also looking for other aspects that was Indigenous around campus. And one of those things that I found was the coursework by Wanda Della Costa, who is Cree, and she is an architect, and she's an Indigenous woman architect. And she kind of introduced me to the indigenization of coursework and how important that was, but not just any sort of coursework, but it was around design. And I really love that fact. And I found the importance of what it means to be, to kind of indigenize the space and also indigenize the pedagogy, in that it made me feel whole. It made me feel welcomed. It just gave me grounding in who I was and confidence in that what I'm doing in design is something that's needed in the future.
Mm-hmm. I think that leads me really well to my next question, because in the time that we've known each other, you're always bringing our ideas and everything that we talk about back to the community. So can you give us a quick overview of the ideas around Indigenous design and Indigenous futurism?
Yeah, I think in Indigenous design and Indigenous futurism, I think that's an interesting topic, in that Indigenous futurism is really, the way I interpret it is more about, if Native nations weren't colonized, where would design be? Where would we be as a people? And what would industrial design in our communities look like? And not only is it incorporating that sort of mindset, but also incorporating kind of almost like a scientific setting. And I think it's a really important topic especially for Indigenous youth to hold on to, is that we still have our imagination and kind of our traditional knowledge as well, that we can mix into each other, but still kind of like think outside the box, to be able to ground ourselves in what we know now today is technology, but also mix that element of traditional knowledge, and then seeing if that can be a catalyst for solutions for the future, whether it's in kind of this fictional world, or if we can bring that into something like today. And when it comes to Indigenous design, like, I think Indigenous design, it's this innate natural ability to problem solve for our community. And I think the one thing that separates Indigenous design from today's world of design is the fact that we're thinking about generations ahead. Like, how can our idea and our decisions affect positively for our future generations, not this generation, not just, how's this product going to do in the marketplace within, for this year. We're thinking 7 generations ahead of what product design means, industrial design means, and then how the solutions can be manifested, not just within this lifetime, but for the next, 7 generations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for designers, it's really important to develop a relationship with the land on which we live and gather and design. As a settler of color here in Lenapehoking, I'm thinking about that constantly. Can you talk a bit about how this can take place, or some of the examples of what you've seen take place?
Yeah, I think as industrial designers, I think it's extremely important to develop a relationship with the land, as much as we can. And I think it's important to spend almost as much time with the land and understanding where materials come from than we do actually researching and developing a product. Like, I think understanding where things come from, what it takes to actually build these things, and where they end up, after we're finally done with that product. I think it's important to understand the full cycle of that, and be able to respect those natural resources that we use all the time, to create these products. And maybe if, you know, especially young designers had more insight of, you know, where these products come from, we would be a little bit more intentional or a little bit more cognizant of how we design things for the future. I think one of the things that that we have to understand, and I know this kind of might sound a little bit weird in me explaining like, oh, we just need to be one with nature. And it's kind of like this hippie-ish, you know, aspect to it. And I think that's kind of something that really puts a bad label on indigenous knowledge. It's like this, you know, this hippie type of approach to, you know, saving the world. But what I think it's important to understand is that there is a difference between worldviews, and there is an indigenous worldview, and then there is a Western worldview. So I think once you kind of have a little bit of an understanding of that, then you know where, you know, our people are kind of coming from, and that, you know, how we look at the land, how we take care of the land. And one of the things that separates the two worldviews is, actually, I think there's probably three things. I think one is time, how we view time. The next is the community over self, like when decision making happens, like you're always thinking about the community and not just about yourself. You're never selfish. You're always thinking about how, you know, you are affecting your elders, your siblings, or even, you know, those in future generations. Mm-hmm. And I think the other part is how we see ourselves within nature. Like as far as the indigenous worldview, it's we don't put walls up and separate ourselves from nature. We're very much a part of it. We're existing with it. And I think that with the Western worldview, it's very much, you know, we live on the soil, the nature is outside, we separate ourselves from it, and that's how we live. But I think understanding those worldviews is a really important part of understanding each other. And and I think in terms of like gathering, it kind of like what I mentioned before about the importance of indigenizing space. And one of my biggest experiences that I've had just recently was in our culture, we have this kind of this 8-sided structure called the hogan. It's built out of logged wood, mud, and kind of just anything and everything that that's from the environment that helps kind of keep the structure. And where we're located in the Southwest. So we're kind of in the northwest part of Arizona, around the Four Corners area. So a lot of that's like pretty, I guess it's a lot of dirt, a lot of open area, with very few trees in some areas. But one of the things that really kind of showed me the importance of indigenizing space is the fact that there is a class in Crown Point, New Mexico, at the Navajo Technical University, where they take classes within the hogan. And I've only seen and known the hogan as kind of like the space of doing ceremony, and the space of where my grandparents lived. But the fact that they had created a classroom that was made out of this hogan was absolutely amazing. And the thing is, like, going to school where you have the four walls, you have the desks all in a row, you have the chalkboard up front, and you have this one person talking and teaching, and talking to everyone, not with the students. That always felt really uncomfortable for me. I don't know why. It just always has, even as a little kid. But being in this space of the hogan, and then seeing that this hogan had been changed into a classroom, where the chalkboard wasn't at the front, but it was at the center of the room, it was empowering. It felt like home. Like it felt like I could be here. I don't feel intimidated. I don't feel like there's, you know, I don't know. It just didn't feel, it just felt welcoming. And I think that me growing up with some traditional cultural teachings and being a part of my family was kind of hit or like it happens not all the time. I didn't grow up on a reservation, so you know I would go to visit my grandparents on the weekends. So I didn't have that direct connection of living on a reservation or with my grandparents and living within the Hogan, but it still felt like home to me. So, and I think that's the strong part of indigenizing space, is that we deconstruct and unlearn the way that we've been learning in the past, of this institutional way of you know learning in a four-walled classroom, but taking it out into nature, or finding ways where we can connect with home, you know?
Yeah, I think that's such a beautiful example of really knowing that these four walls, the chalkboard, that kind of classroom is not a given. It's not universal. So you and I have chatted a bit about how about the colonization of Indigenous practices and sustainability and design being really recaptured and repackaged as some of the design approaches that we hear of sustainability, biomimicry. They're not simply design approaches to pick and choose from. So I am currently in a heat wave. All of my friends and family back home on the West Coast of North America in a desperate heat wave. With fire season having arrived or quickly approaching in many parts of North America, would you like to share some of your thoughts around this idea of sustainability?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And going back to that repackaging thing, you know, when I look at kind of today's definition of sustainability, it has, you know, three pillars. You know, there's the social aspect, there's the environment aspect, and then there's the economic aspect. And I think the economic aspect I struggle with a little bit, but I know we're in a capitalist society, so I get where that comes from. But at the same time, when we look at the way that we view the indigenous, my culture or my tribe, to look at sustainability, that's developing strategies on how the environment and nature can live together. And I think that the current way that sustainability is viewed, it's, you know, how do we just kind of do the bare minimum, and so but still make enough money to kind of get by. It's not even a real change, you know. But I think in order to make a difference with, you know, true sustainability, I guess that's what I'm going to call, coin a term, true sustainability, is that you know, we learn to live with nature. We learn to live with it and not above it and not over it. But, you know, as far as, you know, me coming from, you know, a wildland firefighting background, and understanding fire at a sense where it's where, so it's raining like crazy right now, sorry. It's kind of nice. But learning about fire and how important it is to the landscape, and how much of that aspect of controlling fire has been colonized. And with that being said, a lot of those issues from, you know, the colonization of fire strategies and being able to control fire has really led to a lot of issues we have today, in that we have these super fires, and we have these you know, these neighborhoods that are built so close to areas within within box canyons or within like areas that have historically burned because of the vegetation are there. Things have to burn in order to in nature, in order for it to either regenerate or it just thrives on fire. For instance, like the ponderosa pine, the reason why the bark on it's so thick is because it's used to having fire every single year. And in California, where they have the manzanita and all this brush, it's used to burning every single year, but it doesn't, because you have these subdivisions that are out in the middle of nowhere and it's causing overgrowth. And you can't have people go out there and cut these down, because the acreage is huge. And to be able to go up and down those hills all day, I mean, it's brutal. But I think, as far as the overall aspect of global warming, I mean, that's happening because of our industry. That's probably one of the leading causes of why we have global warming today, is because we're not thinking about what we're producing and how we're producing it. And I think if we really are going to turn this around, I think designers have to be at the table of how we can make change, and especially industrial designers and architects.
Yeah, so before I get to my last question, I do want to hear just a little bit maybe about the indigenous technology of biomimicry and how that might apply.
Yeah, I think, as far as biomimicry goes, I think one of the examples was biomimicry that I was taught in school was like they had this bird. I can't remember what the bird was called, and then they used that same shape of the bird's head to create like the nose of like one of those speed trains in Japan. I think that's interesting. I think it's a really cool aspect of biomimicry. But I think there's a difference between the way that I see biomimicry as far as an indigenous person. That's more of through storytelling. So in our culture, we have this folklore story about the Spider Woman, who is kind of one of the pinnacle characters of our storytelling. And so the Spider Woman basically had taught the Navajo women how to weave so that they could weave blankets, and they could weave clothes and things of that sort to get through the winter. And I think in that sense, where you're using storytelling as a means of you're observing nature, but you're also using it in a way where you could teach your kids that the way that the spider weaves is the way that we should weave in order to create certain things, as far as rugs or blankets for survival. And I think that in a way is the way that we use biomimicry in order to pass on traditional knowledge to multiple generations.
Awesome. We are coming up on time. So what I'm actually going to do is, rather than ask you my last question about Indigenous designers leading the industry, other than yourself, that I can share, I'm going to paste the names that you've shared with me in the chat, and just ask you to share any last thoughts that you have.
Yeah, no, I just want to thank you, Amanda, for participating and everyone here to be here and listen and to have an open mind. Really appreciate everyone being here.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Amanda, for sharing such a wonderful session.